Welcome to This Explainer. We constantly hear this legend of the lone genius in a garage, the Steve Jobs or Elon Musk type, who somehow changes the world with just a great idea and a ton of hard work. But today, we're looking past those motivational speeches to examine the invisible social architectures that actually govern who gets to innovate, who gets funded, and who ultimately succeeds. So let's kick things off with a bit of a provocative question. Are billionaires truly self-made? Or is that lone genius in a garage just a really comforting fiction? We're fed this narrative constantly, the idea of the solitary pioneer conquering the market. But as we pull from deep sociological research today, we're going to see that business is absolutely never an isolated event, and that being self-made might just be the biggest myth in modern capitalism. To answer that, we actually need to dismantle the classic heroic entrepreneur trope. Let's jump into section 1, the solo founder myth. Now, mainstream culture assumes this very straightforward reality. Grit plus rational economics equals success, right? Basically, if you work hard, you win. But critical theory argues this is a profound illusion. The sociological view actually shows us that invisible systems, things like networks, unwritten rules, power dynamics, and societal structures, are what's really running the show behind the scenes. In fact, critical theorists like Ogwar argue that this solo founder myth actually gaslights minority business owners. Think about it. If you fail, the dominant narrative says, well, you just didn't work hard enough, or it's a personal deficit of character. It completely ignores that, structurally speaking, the playing field was never level to begin with. Those entrenched systemic hurdles make a massive, massive difference. So if it's not just isolated genius driving success, what is it? That brings us to section 2, the invisible social web. The absolutely crucial point here is what economic sociologist Karl Polanyi called embeddedness. I mean, you wouldn't do a massive business deal with a total stranger the exact same way you would with a trusted community member, right? A startup is completely submerged in these unwritten social expectations, religious ties, and community norms. Trust and reciprocity act as this invisible glue. You aren't just selling a product, you are navigating a highly complex web of human relationships. Which leads us directly to social capital. In the sociological view, your network is quite literally your net worth. It's wild to think about, but these social ties actually act as a direct substitute for cash or investment capital. They give you access to private information flows that you simply cannot get from a bank or a quick Google search. Your ability to spot a massive opportunity, that's largely tied to the private intelligence flowing through your specific social web. And here is a mind-blowing stat from sociologist Mark Granovetter back in 1973. He found that 75% of people got their jobs through acquaintances, not their close friends. Why? Well, because your best friends share redundant information. You guys all know the same things. It's actually your distant acquaintances, those weak ties operating in completely different circles, who bring you the most novel, world-changing opportunities. Taking this a step further, sociologist Ronald Burt coined this great term, structural holes. A structural hole is basically a gap between two groups that just don't talk to each other, like, say, software engineers and biologists. By acting as a broker who bridges these disconnected networks, an entrepreneur can control information flows and spot massive unseen opportunities. You basically become the critical node that holds the entire ecosystem together. But networks aren't the only forces at play here. Let's dive into how formal and informal institutions dictate who actually gets to innovate in Section 3, the rules of the game. According to W. Richard Scott's institutional theory, every single entrepreneur has to navigate these 3 specific pillars to gain legitimacy. First, you have the regulatory pillar, so the actual laws and government policies. Second is the normative pillar, which covers your industry's unwritten standards and social obligations. And third, the cognitive pillar. These are the cultural beliefs we all just kind of take for granted. If you ignore these, society slaps you with what's called the liability of newness. Basically, your business is deemed illegitimate and is pretty much dead on arrival, no matter how incredibly cool the tech is. William Baumol expands on this brilliantly. He argues that society's rules dictate exactly where human ambition goes. Every society has ambitious people for sure, but if the rules reward innovation, you get productive tech startups. Now, if bad policies or tax loopholes reward rent-seeking, alert entrepreneurs become unproductive. And if the rules literally reward violence, like back in feudal Europe, ambition channels into destructive warlordism. The rules literally shape the outcome. Since those in charge set these rules, we objectively have to look at who gets excluded. Let's move to Section 4, power, privilege, and misfits. To ground feminist theory in some hard data, consider this staggering metric. In 2020, companies founded solely by women garnered only 2.3% of the total venture capital invested in the US. 2.3%. This reveals a massive systemic disparity. It clearly shows us that access to critical capital is deeply intertwined with historical structures and bias, going way, way beyond simple market efficiency. Critical theories neutrally observe that these compounding barriers act as a sort of invisible tax on marginalized founders. We're talking about systemic disinvestment, predatory lending, and being completely locked out of those vital capital networks we just discussed. When race, gender, class, and ability intersect, it proves the playing field is heavily structured by who you are, not just what you're building. And this creates a really stark contrast in motivations. On one hand, you have opportunity entrepreneurship, which is fueled by privilege, starting a venture because you can afford the risk, knowing a safety net will catch you if you fall. On the other hand, necessity entrepreneurship is basically a survival strategy for those pushed out of traditional jobs. If you think about the variety of small businesses in your own city, you'll likely see both of these forces actively at work. This brings us to a fascinating concept: misfit theory. Have you ever wondered why immigrants and social outliers start businesses at such incredibly high rates? It's because they refuse to conform. They can't or won't fit into the dominant system or traditional corporate structures. So they're driven to literally author their own microcultures through entrepreneurship. Okay, so we've seen how the system restricts people, but how do founders actually fight back? Let's wrap up with Section 5, Rewriting the System. Structuration theory, originally put forward by Anthony Giddens, shows us this really fascinating duality. Yes, the entrepreneur is deeply shaped and constrained by society's rules. But, and here's the kicker, through their actions, disruptive innovations, and sheer persistence, they actually establish entirely new social norms and structures. It's a continuous loop. You're shaped by the system, but you simultaneously rewrite the system as you build. Rindova's Emancipation Theory beautifully maps this out as a three-step cycle. First, seeking autonomy, literally breaking free from the status quo or some authority figure. Second, authoring, writing your own rules and constructing a new identity. And finally, making bold declarations, using provocative rhetoric to speak a completely new reality into existence. So entrepreneurship here isn't just about making money, it's an intentional pursuit of liberation. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. We've seen today that business is never just a solo economic act. It is a deeply sociological phenomenon bound by networks, institutions, and power dynamics. So, looking at your own ventures, or even just the businesses you support, are you just playing by society's existing rules, or are you going to rewrite them? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the structures around you.